There are versions that suggest the butterfly appeared at the wrong time, or perhaps at the only possible time. According to fragmented tellings, it wasn't remarkable at first. Just a pale shape drifting through the afternoon air, moving without urgency, landing where it shouldn't have lingered. The kind of presence people notice only after it refuses to leave. Some believe the grandson noticed it before anything else went wrong. Others suggest the danger was already forming, quietly, invisibly, long before wings brushed the edge of his awareness. What remains consistent is this: the butterfly behaved unlike the others. It did not scatter, it did not flee. It hovered, returned, traced the same small arc again and again, as if repeating a thought that could not be spoken. There are versions where the boy tried to wave it away. It came back. Versions where it landed close enough to interrupt what he was doing, close enough to demand attention without force, close enough to slow him. And slowing, according to those who recount the story later, mattered more than stopping, because the moment that followed was brief. A misstep, a shift, a consequence waiting to happen. Some tellings suggest that if the boy had moved 1 second sooner or 1 step farther, the outcome would have been irreversible, not dramatic, not cinematic, just final. The butterfly intervened without touching anything, no contact, no warning, only distraction. There are accounts where the boy later described feeling watched, not by the insect, but through it, a sensation of familiarity layered over confusion, as if recognition arrived before explanation. The grandfather had been gone for some time, long enough for grief to soften, not long enough to disappear. In these versions, the connection was never stated aloud. It surfaced later, in reflection, in coincidence, in the uncomfortable alignment of memory and timing. Some believe the butterfly was only an insect, others believe it was something else. What no version disputes is that after it appeared, the sequence broke, the moment passed, the danger dissolved. And when the butterfly finally lifted and vanished, it left behind a question that would never fully settle. Was the timing accidental? Or was someone somehow still paying attention? There are stories that insist on being told carefully. This is one of them. What follows is not presented as fact, proof, or explanation. It is a narrative shaped by fragments, interpretations, and moments that resist certainty. Details vary depending on who remembers them, and meaning emerges only in hindsight, never in the moment itself. In many versions, the grandson never set out to connect the butterfly to his grandfather. The idea surfaced gradually, as ideas often do when they are not invited. A memory resurfacing at the wrong time, a pattern noticed too late to ignore, a feeling that did not ask permission before settling in. The grandfather, according to these tellings, had been a quiet presence in life, not expressive, not dramatic, the kind of person whose influence is felt more than announced. His absence, when it came, did not arrive with spectacle. It arrived with silence and the slow reorganization of routine that follows loss. Butterflies had never held special meaning before. That detail matters, because symbols chosen in advance are easy to interpret. Symbols that appear uninvited are harder to dismiss. As you listen, you may find yourself recalling moments of interruption in your own life, small delays, unexpected distractions, instances where something ordinary shifted your attention just long enough for a different outcome to unfold. If you're watching from somewhere tonight where memory still feels close, you're welcome to leave a comment sharing where you're listening from. Stories like this often feel different depending on what or who we've lost. And if you choose to continue with this narrative, consider subscribing. Not because it promises answers, but because it explores the quiet possibility that connection does not always end when presence does. What follows is not a story about proof. It is a story about timing, about attention redirected at the exact moment it mattered, about protection that does not announce itself, and about how meaning sometimes arrives disguised as coincidence, asking only that we notice it before it disappears. There are versions that suggest the grandfather had always been attentive in small ways, not protective in the obvious sense, not controlling, attentive. According to some tellings, he was the kind of presence that noticed details others overlooked. Loose steps, unstable ground, habits that carried quiet risk. He did not warn loudly. He corrected gently, often without explanation. The grandson, growing up, rarely questioned this. At the time, it felt ordinary. Only later did it feel intentional. When the grandfather was gone, that attentiveness disappeared from daily life. No one else watched with the same patience. No one else paused moments before something went wrong. The boy adjusted, as people do. He grew older, more independent, less supervised. In most versions of the story, the day the butterfly appeared was not significant on its own. No anniversary, no emotional marker, just an ordinary afternoon shaped by routine and mild distraction. The boy was focused on something simple, a task, a curiosity, a moment that required attention but not caution. That detail matters, because danger rarely announces itself when attention is already heightened. It forms when focus is relaxed, when confidence replaces awareness. There are tellings where the grandfather had once warned him about this exact behavior, not dramatically, casually, a passing comment about timing, about slowing down, about looking twice instead of once. These memories resurfaced later, after the butterfly was gone, when reconstruction replaced immediacy. The butterfly appeared without urgency. No sudden motion, no dramatic landing. It drifted into the boy's field of vision slowly, interrupting nothing at first. According to some accounts, the boy barely noticed it until it returned, again and again, to the same narrow space. It did not land randomly. It hovered near where the boy was about to step, near where attention would have shifted forward rather than downward. This proximity is described differently across versions, but the pattern remains. The butterfly occupied the exact space that forced hesitation. The boy paused, not out of fear, out of curiosity. That pause altered everything. Some believe the danger had already been set in motion by then, a surface not as stable as it appeared, a movement misjudged by inches rather than feet. In these tellings, the butterfly did not prevent the danger directly. It disrupted the sequence that would have completed it. There are versions where the boy later described feeling irritation at first. Why won't it leave? Why here? These thoughts mattered. Irritation slows action. Slowing creates awareness. The butterfly moved in short arcs, never leaving the immediate area. It did not settle fully. It did not flee. It behaved as if uncertainty itself were guiding it. Some versions emphasize the boy's growing sense of unease, not fear, but wrongness, a feeling that the moment had shifted, that something was misaligned. This sensation prompted him to look down instead of ahead. That glance revealed what had been missed. The instability, the risk, the misstep waiting to happen. According to all tellings, the realization arrived just in time, not early enough to feel cautious, not late enough to feel regret, just in time to adjust. The boy stepped back. The sequence broke. Only then did the butterfly leave. It lifted without haste and disappeared beyond the edge of attention, as if its presence had expired the moment its purpose, whatever that may have been, was fulfilled. The boy did not chase it. He did not reflect immediately. The moment passed without ceremony. It is only later, according to some reconstructions, that the weight of timing became clear, that the interruption had not been random, that the butterfly's behavior had not aligned with expectation. Butterflies scatter. They do not persist. They do not return to the same narrow space repeatedly. The grandfather entered the story afterward, not as apparition, not as voice, as memory. The boy recalled how his grandfather used to interrupt moments like that, not with urgency, with presence, A cough, a question, a pause inserted at the right second. Some believe this parallel is coincidence, others believe it is pattern. The story does not resolve this. What it preserves is the alignment, the grandfather's absence, the boy's vulnerability, the butterfly's timing. There are versions where the boy dismissed the connection at first. Rational explanations surfaced easily. Insects behave unpredictably. Attention drifts. Luck intervenes. But dismissal did not erase the feeling that followed. The feeling of being watched over, not from above but from nearby. Not as surveillance, as familiarity. This feeling lingered longer than the event itself. It followed the boy into later moments of hesitation, into pauses that arrived without clear reason, into instincts that urged slowing down without explanation. Some believe these instincts were learned, others believe they were inherited, still others believe they were carried. The story does not insist, it suggests that sometimes protection does not appear as prevention, it appears as interruption. And that interruption, when examined later, can resemble the habits of someone we once trusted to notice what we could not. According to every version that persists, the butterfly never returned. It did not need to. Its presence was complete. What remained was the question, not whether the grandfather had returned, but whether leaving truly means disappearing, and whether attention, once learned, can travel forward, through memory, through instinct, or through forms that refuse to be explained. There are versions that suggest the meaning of the interruption did not surface immediately. It unfolded. According to several reconstructions, the boy walked away from the moment without urgency. The danger had passed. The ground felt stable again. The afternoon resumed its ordinary shape. If someone had asked him then what had happened, he might have struggled to explain why he felt unsettled. Nothing dramatic had occurred. And yet, something had shifted. The pause lingered longer than the event itself. The boy found himself replaying the sequence, not obsessively, but curiously. The butterfly's persistence, the exact place it hovered, the way it disappeared the instant the risk was recognized. These details resisted dismissal. Some versions suggest he mentioned the butterfly casually later that day, not as warning, not as revelation, as observation. The reaction he received mattered. Those who listened did not share his sense of strangeness. Butterflies wander, they said. Timing aligns sometimes. The explanation was sufficient but not satisfying. Sufficiency does not resolve meaning. It only delays it. That night, according to some tellings, the boy dreamed lightly, not symbolically, not vividly, just fragments of movement, air, color, a sense of something nearby without form. These dreams did not frighten him. They felt neutral, almost familiar. The grandfather appeared only indirectly, not as figure, as sensation, the feeling of someone noticing before speaking, of someone clearing a throat before a mistake, of attention arriving before consequence. These impressions were subtle enough to be dismissed as imagination, and yet they returned. In the days that followed, the boy began to notice changes in his own behavior. He slowed slightly before moving. He checked footing more often. He paused when intuition suggested hesitation. These adjustments were not conscious. They did not feel learned. They felt remembered. Some believe this is how influence persists, through habit rather than belief, through the quiet replication of behaviors once modeled and absorbed. The grandfather in life had never spoken about protection. He had practiced it. The butterfly, in this framing, becomes less symbol and more echo, an interruption that resembled a pattern already familiar to the boy's body, even if his mind struggled to name it. There are versions where the boy later encountered other butterflies. None behaved the same. They flitted and scattered. They passed through without insistence. None returned to the same place twice. None demanded attention. This contrast sharpened the memory. The butterfly from that afternoon stood apart, not because of appearance, but because of behavior. It had acted with purpose, or at least with persistence that felt purposeful. Some believe this persistence was coincidence magnified by outcome. Others believe outcome revealed intention retroactively. The story does not decide. It allows both to coexist. What matters is that the boy began to associate hesitation with safety, not fear-based hesitation, attentive hesitation, the kind that interrupts momentum just long enough to reassess. This habit saved him from other small missteps later on. Nothing dramatic, nothing noteworthy, but each time the pause arrived uninvited, like a quiet reminder. Some versions suggest the boy eventually connected this habit to his grandfather consciously, not as belief, as recognition. He remembered how the grandfather would slow him without explanation, how he would place a hand lightly on an arm, how he would say, "Wait," without urgency. These memories gained new weight, not because they explained the butterfly, but because they aligned with it. The alignment mattered more than explanation. There are tellings where the boy wrestled briefly with the idea of reincarnation, not academically, personally. The thought felt too precise to be comforting and too vague to be provable. He did not adopt it as belief. He carried it as possibility. Possibility does not demand commitment. It only asks for openness. The butterfly became a reference point rather than a conclusion, a moment he returned to when coincidence felt heavy and timing felt deliberate. He did not tell many people about it. Stories like this resist casual sharing. They either invite dismissal or invite belief, neither of which he wanted. He preferred to let the moment remain ambiguous. Ambiguity protected its meaning. Some believe this restraint preserved the story. By not naming it, the boy allowed it to influence him quietly. He did not frame himself as protected or chosen. He framed himself as attentive. The grandfather's presence in this way did not return as figure or voice. It returned as pattern, attention before action, pause before consequence. The butterfly did not need to appear again. Its role was not to repeat, but to introduce. According to some reconstructions, the boy eventually realized something else, that the butterfly had not drawn him away from danger by force. It had simply redirected attention. Redirection preserves agency. It does not override choice. The boy chose to pause. He chose to look. He chose to step back. This distinction matters. If protection arrives without choice, it replaces learning. If it arrives through interruption, it teaches. The grandfather in life had always preferred teaching over shielding. Some believe the butterfly reflected that preference. Others believe the boy projected meaning where comfort was needed. The story does not argue. It preserves the shape of the moment, a brief interruption, a broken sequence, a consequence that never occurred, and a presence that did not announce itself, but aligned so closely with memory that it became difficult to separate the two. According to every version that persists, the boy did not become someone who looked for signs. He became someone who noticed pauses, and that perhaps was the quiet inheritance left behind. Not wings or transformation, but attention passed forward in a form that could not be named and did not need to be explained. There are versions that suggest the real change came later, when the boy began to trust the pauses, not the butterfly, the hesitation it introduced. According to several reconstructions, time passed without incident. Days folded back into routine. The afternoon of interruption settled into memory, losing sharp edges but retaining weight. The boy did not expect another sign. He did not search for repetition. What changed was subtler. Moments that once carried momentum now carried checkpoints. Before stepping forward, before deciding quickly, before assuming safety, a brief stillness appeared. Not fear, attention. Some believe this stillness was learned behavior. Others suggest it was remembered behavior, resurfacing from earlier years when the grandfather had been present. The line between learning and remembering blurred. The grandfather in life had trusted timing more than instruction. He did not say, "Be careful," often. He waited for the right second to intervene. This pattern repeated itself now without him. The boy noticed it most when nothing went wrong. That detail matters. When danger is visible, hesitation feels justified. But when nothing appears wrong, pausing feels unnecessary, unless something internal insists. There are tellings where the boy hesitated before crossing paths, before climbing, before moving too quickly through unfamiliar spaces. These hesitations did not prevent dramatic events. They prevented small errors. A slip avoided, a fall that didn't happen, a moment of embarrassment quietly erased. None of these moments alone felt significant. Together, they formed a pattern. Some versions describe the boy slowly becoming known as cautious, not fearful, measured. This reputation surprised him. He did not feel cautious internally. He felt attentive. The distinction mattered. Fear narrows action. Attention refines it. The butterfly, in this phase of the story, receded almost entirely. It became reference rather than focus. The grandfather, however, grew more present in memory, not through longing, but through recognition. The boy began to recall small behaviors he had once ignored, how the grandfather listened more than he spoke, how he noticed shifts in weather, ground, mood, how he respected transitions, dusk, corners, thresholds. These memories aligned with the pauses. Some believe this alignment created meaning retroactively. Others believe meaning had always been present, simply unnoticed. The story does not choose. It allows that attention can arrive before explanation. There are versions where the boy asked himself quietly whether the butterfly had been necessary at all. Would he have paused anyway? The question remained unanswered. Perhaps interruption was required only once, to introduce a pattern that could sustain itself afterward. In these tellings, the butterfly was not a guardian, it was a reminder. Reminders do not repeat endlessly. They appear once and expect recognition. The boy did not become someone who believed he was being watched over constantly. That belief would have created dependency. Instead, he became someone who trusted his internal signal to slow down. This trust mattered. It preserved autonomy. There are accounts where the boy later faced moments of higher risk, not dramatic, just consequential, a hurried decision, a choice between speed and caution. In these moments, the pause returned, not as image, as sensation, a subtle tightening, a sense of weight. Not loud enough to frighten, but clear enough to interrupt momentum. The boy learned to respect this signal, not always understanding it, but acknowledging it. Some believe this respect saved him from larger consequences later on. Others argue that this interpretation exaggerates coincidence. The story does not dispute skepticism. It simply preserves the sequence: interruption, adjustment, continuation. The grandfather's influence in this framing does not require supernatural explanation. It requires continuity. Habits passed forward do not disappear with absence. They reappear when needed, shaped by memory, instinct, or something that feels like inheritance. There are tellings where the boy realized that protection, when it works best, does not feel like protection. It feels like choice. He chose to slow down. He chose to look. He chose to adjust. The butterfly did not push him. The grandfather did not command him. Attention was invited, not imposed. This distinction softened the story. It removed drama. It preserved dignity. The boy did not feel saved. He felt aligned with something familiar that had not disappeared when the grandfather did. Some believe this is why the story endured, not because of what might have returned, but because of what remained. a pattern of noticing, a respect for timing, a habit of pausing before irreversible moments. The butterfly never appeared again in the same way, and it did not need to. According to every version that persists, the true continuation of the story was not external, it was internal. The boy carried forward a form of guidance that required no belief system, no explanation, no proof, only attention. And perhaps that is the quietest possibility the story offers. That reincarnation, if it exists at all, does not always arrive as form or identity. Sometimes it arrives as behavior, as timing, as interruption, as the instinct to pause at the exact moment something irreversible might otherwise occur. And that instinct, once learned or remembered, does not need wings to move forward. It simply needs to be noticed. There are versions that suggest the boy did not immediately recognize how much the pauses were shaping him. Change that arrives quietly often goes unnoticed. According to several reconstructions, weeks passed in which nothing remarkable occurred. No close calls, no moments dramatic enough to be remembered later, and yet the boy's behavior continued to adjust in small, consistent ways. He walked with a different awareness of ground. He listened longer before responding. He waited just a little before committing to movement. These were not rules he had decided to follow. They were tendencies. Some believe tendencies are how influence survives absence. The grandfather, in memory, had never rushed. Even when time mattered, he slowed his pace slightly, as if refusing to let urgency dictate judgment. The boy had noticed this as a child without understanding it. Now, the same rhythm began to appear in him. The butterfly's role faded further. It no longer appeared in thought as an image. It existed as origin, acknowledged, then set aside. The boy did not need to recall wings to feel the pause. The pause arrived on its own. There are tellings where adults around him began to comment, not with concern, with mild surprise. "You're careful," someone said once. "You notice things," said another. The boy did not correct them. Careful was close enough. Notice was accurate. Some believe this social reflection reinforced the change. Others argue it merely named what was already happening. Either way, the behavior persisted. There are versions where the boy later encountered moments that tested the pause more directly, moments where acting quickly would have felt easier, moments where hesitation carried social cost. In these situations, the pause did not disappear, but it shortened. Not every moment allows full stillness. The boy learned to balance attention with movement. He did not freeze, he adjusted. The pause became elastic, stretching when risk was unclear, compressing when timing demanded action. This adaptability mattered. It suggested that the pause was not fear-based. Fear rigidifies. This pause refined. Some believe this refinement distinguished instinct from anxiety. Anxiety demands avoidance. Instinct demands calibration. The grandfather, in recollection, had practiced calibration constantly. He adjusted tone, pace, posture, always in response to context rather than habit. The boy began to recognize this pattern more clearly now. Memory reorganized itself. Moments once dismissed as insignificant gained weight. Not because they explained the butterfly, but because they aligned with what followed it. There are tellings where the boy briefly questioned whether he was assigning too much meaning to coincidence. The thought surfaced naturally. Coincidence is easier to accept than implication. But the question did not unsettle him. He did not need certainty. The value of the pause did not depend on origin. It depended on outcome. And the outcomes were consistently quiet. Nothing went wrong. That detail matters. Protection that announces itself invites attention. Protection that prevents consequence leaves only absence. Absence is easy to overlook but difficult to argue with. Some versions suggest the boy became more tolerant of uncertainty because of this. Not everything needed explanation. Not every feeling needed label. He learned to trust the pause without demanding reason. This trust did not replace logic, it complemented it. The boy still assessed risks consciously. He still made mistakes, but when intuition suggested waiting, he listened. This listening did not feel mystical. It felt familiar. There are accounts where the boy later faced a moment that echoed the original interruption, not identical, resonant, a place where movement felt ordinary, a moment where consequence weighted just beyond attention. And again, the pause arrived, not as butterfly, as tightening awareness. He stopped, looked, adjusted. The outcome passed quietly, leaving no story worth telling. Only later did the boy recognize the similarity in structure, if not in detail. The sequence repeated. Attention before action, action before consequence, consequence avoided without spectacle. Some believe this repetition strengthened the connection to the grandfather. Others believe it strengthened the boy's confidence in himself. The story allows both. Influence and autonomy are not opposites. They often coexist. The grandfather's presence, if it existed at all beyond memory, did not override choice. It aligned with it. This alignment prevented dependency. The boy did not wait for signs. He did not look for butterflies. He trusted timing. There are tellings where the boy eventually spoke about the butterfly again, not as proof, as curiosity. He shared it with someone who listened without judgment. The listener offered no explanation, only acknowledgement that some moments resist clarity. This response mattered. It preserved ambiguity rather than resolving it prematurely. The story remained intact because it was not forced into meaning. Some believe this restraint honored the grandfather's nature more than any declaration could have. He had never liked exaggeration. He had preferred usefulness over symbolism. The pause was useful. That was enough. As time continued, the boy did not become someone defined by caution or mysticism. He became someone defined by timing. He learned when to move and when to wait, not perfectly but attentively. The butterfly remained singular. Its rarity preserved its weight. According to every version that persists, the story does not escalate. It settles. The interruption becomes habit. The habit becomes instinct. The instinct becomes part of the boy's way of navigating the world. And the grandfather, whether through memory, influence, or something that resists naming, remains present not as figure, but as pattern. A pattern of noticing what others miss, of pausing before irreversible steps, of respecting the moment where attention can still change outcome. Perhaps that is the quietest form of return the story allows, not as identity reclaimed, not as proof offered, but as behavior continued, moving forward in time, carried by someone else, without needing to explain where it came from. There are versions that suggest the boy did not fully understand what had changed until something nearly repeated itself. Not the butterfly, the pattern. According to several reconstructions, time created distance from the original moment. Memory softened its edges. The interruption became less vivid, less immediate. What remained was the habit of pausing, a habit that now felt natural rather than introduced. And that is when familiarity became dangerous. Habits, once internalized, stop announcing themselves. They blend into routine. The boy no longer noticed when he slowed down. He simply did. Until one day, the pause arrived too late to feel comfortable. The moment unfolded quietly. No urgency. No warning signs dramatic enough to trigger fear. Just an ordinary situation, layered with subtle risk. The kind that does not announce consequence until sequence is already in motion. According to some tellings, the boy felt the hesitation a fraction of a second after movement had begun. That delay mattered. The pause arrived, but it arrived late. He adjusted anyway, not stopping completely, redirecting. The outcome was not catastrophic. It was not even notable to anyone else, but internally, The boy felt the difference. The pause had not prevented the sequence, it had modified it. This realization unsettled him more than the original interruption. Before, the pause had felt protective. Now it felt instructional. Protection avoids consequence. Instruction refines response. Some believe this marked a shift in how the boy understood what had happened with the butterfly. Perhaps the moment was not about saving him. Perhaps it was about teaching him how to notice when saving was no longer possible, and adjustment was required instead. The grandfather in memory had done this often. He had not always prevented mistakes. He had softened them, redirected them, turned potential harm into manageable outcome. The boy remembered this more clearly now. The pause, in this framing, was not a guarantee, it was a signal. Signals do not remove responsibility, they sharpen it. There are versions where the boy began to pay closer attention to when the pause arrived. Early pauses felt different from late ones. Early pauses were gentle, late pauses were urgent. The body communicated timing through sensation rather than thought. This awareness developed slowly. The boy did not analyze it academically, he felt it. The pause carried tone, weight, texture. It was not always the same. Some believe this sensitivity marked maturation. Others believe it reflected memory, integrating into instinct. The story does not choose. What matters is that the boy stopped expecting interruption to arrive at the perfect moment. He learned to respect that timing is not guaranteed. The butterfly had arrived at exactly the right second. That would not always happen. There are tellings where the boy wrestled briefly with disappointment over this realization, not consciously, emotionally. The idea that protection might be conditional, that attention could fail if not maintained, introduced vulnerability. The pause required participation. It was not passive. This requirement mattered. It restored agency fully. The boy was not being watched over constantly. He was being invited to notice. There are versions where he began to cultivate attention deliberately, not obsessively, intentionally. He looked longer before moving. He assessed space more carefully. He trusted early hesitation more than late correction. This was not fear-based, it was strategic. The grandfather's influence, if present, now felt less like intervention and more like guidance. Guidance does not remove choice, it informs it. The boy began to see how easily distraction weakened the pause. When attention scattered, hesitation dulled. When presence sharpened, timing improved. This correlation mattered. It suggested that awareness itself was the mechanism, not the butterfly, not the memory, not the possibility of return. Awareness was active. Some believe this reframed the entire story. Perhaps the butterfly had not come as the grandfather. Perhaps it had come like him, as a demonstration. Demonstrations do not repeat endlessly. They expect application. The boy did not need another butterfly. He needed to practice attention. There are tellings where this realization stabilized him. The mystery no longer demanded interpretation. The meaning became practical. Pause earlier. Notice sooner. Respect the moment before momentum takes over. The grandfather had lived this way, not dramatically, quietly. He had understood that most harm occurs not from ignorance, but from speed, from moving faster than awareness. The boy adopted this understanding without naming it. There are accounts where the boy later recognized how this shift affected more than physical movement. He paused before speaking, before reacting, before assuming. These pauses altered relationships subtly. Conflict softened, misunderstandings resolved more easily. The pattern extended beyond safety into communication. Some believe this extension proves the pause was never about danger alone. It was about timing in all things. The butterfly's intervention in this reading was simply the most visible instance of a broader principle. Others argue this is narrative layering imposed after the fact. The story does not reject skepticism. It simply preserves continuity. The pause appeared, the pause taught, the pause evolved. According to every version that persists, the boy did not become vigilant or anxious. He became present. Presence sharpened the pause. And the pause, once sharpened, no longer required wings to announce itself. The grandfather's return, if it can be called that, did not remain tied to a single form. It expanded into timing, into awareness, into the space between action and consequence, where choice still exists, and perhaps that is the most lasting transformation the story allows. Not that someone came back as something else, but that something essential was carried forward, adapted, refined, and eventually internalized, until it no longer needed to be explained. There are versions that suggest understanding arrived not through repetition, but through absence. After the near miss that altered his perception of timing, nothing unusual followed. No second warning, no symbolic return. The pause did not announce itself for a while, and the boy began to notice what it felt like when it was not there. According to several reconstructions, this absence created contrast. Without the pause, moments moved faster, decisions felt smoother, but thinner. Actions flowed without resistance, and while nothing immediately went wrong, something felt incomplete, as if a layer of awareness had been temporarily removed. The boy did not panic. He observed. Observation had become instinct. He noticed that when his mind wandered, the pause softened. When attention narrowed, it returned. Not dramatically, but reliably. This pattern repeated often enough to be noticeable, though never enough to feel mechanical. Some believe this was the point where the story shifted from mystery to discipline. Not belief, practice. The pause was not granted, it was cultivated. The grandfather's influence, if present at all now, felt less like intervention and more like inheritance, not of form, but of method. A way of moving through the world that prioritized timing over speed. The boy began to see how rarely people respected timing. They rushed answers, they filled silence, they acted before looking. He had done the same once. Now, restraint felt less like loss and more like alignment. He did not feel slowed. He felt placed, where attention and movement met without friction. There are tellings where this awareness deepened during moments of emotional intensity, arguments, pressure, expectation. In these moments, the pause became harder to access. Emotion accelerates sequence. It narrows perception. The boy learned this quickly. When emotions surged, the pause shortened. When he breathed, literally slowed breath, the pause lengthened again. This correlation mattered. It suggested that the pause was not external at all. It lived inside attention. Some believe this realization dissolved the need for explanation entirely. If the pause could be strengthened through presence, then origin mattered less than application. Whether it came from memory, learning, or something unnamed became secondary. What mattered was that it worked. The boy began to treat the pause as a skill, not perfected, practiced. He did not always succeed. There were moments when he moved too quickly, spoke too soon, trusted impulse over awareness. These moments produced consequences, small ones, but consequences nonetheless. And these consequences taught him something else. The pause was not a guarantee of safety. It was a chance to adjust, a chance to choose differently. The grandfather in memory had never promised protection. He had offered guidance. He had trusted the boy to learn. This trust resurfaced now, not as expectation, but as respect. There are versions where the boy finally articulated this to himself, not aloud, internally, that whatever had happened with the butterfly had not been about being saved. It had been about being shown how easily attention could change outcome, shown how small delays could prevent irreversible steps. The butterfly had not removed danger, it had revealed it. This reframing altered the emotional weight of the story. It removed dependency. It preserved dignity. The boy no longer felt like someone watched over. He felt like someone entrusted. There are tellings where he later encountered situations that could not be paused out of, moments where consequence arrived despite awareness, where timing failed or choice narrowed too quickly. These moments did not break the pattern, they tested it. In these situations, the pause did something else. It softened response. Instead of panic, there was assessment. Instead of reaction, adjustment. The pause did not prevent difficulty, but it shaped how difficulty was met. Some believe this was the grandfather's truest legacy. Not avoidance of harm, competence within it. The boy did not become fearless. He became adaptable. This adaptability extended beyond safety. It entered conversation, decision-making, expectation. He learned to wait before assuming intention, to pause before responding defensively, to allow space where clarity could emerge. Relationships shifted subtly because of this. Conflict de-escalated more often. Misunderstandings resolved faster. The pause, once associated with danger, became associated with understanding. There are skeptics who would argue this is simply maturity, and they may be right. The story does not resist that explanation. It allows that growth can wear many masks. What remains constant across versions is the structure. An interruption, a pattern introduced, a skill developed. Whether the grandfather returned as a butterfly or whether memory and instinct combined at the right moment, the outcome is the same. The boy learned timing, and timing, once learned, does not need symbols. There are no accounts where the boy seeks meaning obsessively. He does not analyze the event endlessly. He does not convert it into belief. He lets it exist as origin, not conclusion. The butterfly becomes less important than what followed it. According to every reconstruction that persists, the story's power lies not in what appeared, but in what remained usable. Attention, pause, choice. The boy carries these forward without ceremony. He does not explain them. He does not defend them. He practices them. And perhaps that is the quietest resolution the story allows, that whatever returned, if anything did not come to be noticed forever. It came once, to interrupt a sequence, to introduce a pause, and to trust that what followed would continue without needing wings, signs, or explanation. Only awareness, carried forward by someone willing to slow down at the exact moment it matters. There are versions that suggest the pause began to reveal itself most clearly when it no longer concerned safety at all. According to several reconstructions, as the boy grew older, the moments that demanded hesitation were no longer physical. There were fewer edges to misjudge, fewer unstable surfaces. The risks became quieter, embedded in decisions rather than movement. Words instead of steps, choices instead of paths. The pause adapted. It did not arrive with the same bodily urgency. It appeared as a subtle resistance, an internal slowing, when the boy was about to respond too quickly, assume too much, or commit without clarity. This evolution mattered. If the butterfly had been about immediate danger, what followed was about consequence over time. Some believe this shift proves the pause was never tied to a single event. It was scalable. It adjusted to context, expanding beyond the original interruption into something broader and more complex. The grandfather, in memory, had handled decisions this way. He had never rushed conclusions. He listened past the first explanation. He waited through discomfort. The boy remembered this now with greater precision, noticing how patience had shaped outcomes more than urgency ever had. There are tellings where the boy began to recognize the pause during conversations. Moments when a response formed too easily, when agreement felt convenient, when silence would have been easier than honesty. In these moments, the pause asked a question without words. Is this the right moment to move forward? Sometimes the answer was yes, sometimes it was not. The pause did not dictate, it suggested. This suggestion preserved autonomy. The boy could ignore it, and sometimes did, but when he listened, outcomes tended to shift subtly. Misunderstanding softened, regret diminished. Consequences, when they came, felt manageable rather than overwhelming. Some believe this pattern reflects emotional maturity rather than anything extraordinary. The story does not dispute that. It allows that what begins as interruption can evolve into skill, and that skill can be indistinguishable from growth. Still, the structure remains. The pause had an origin. The pause adapted. The pause endured. There are versions where the boy encountered a situation that tested whether he would trust the pause, even when it conflicted with desire. A choice that promised immediate satisfaction, but carried long-term cost. A decision where urgency disguised itself as necessity. The pause arrived quietly, not strong enough to force reconsideration, just present enough to be noticed. The boy hesitated. Not long. Long enough. That hesitation altered the outcome, not by removing opportunity, but by reframing it. He chose differently. The consequence unfolded slowly, without drama, but with stability. Later, reflecting on the choice, the boy recognized how easily he might have moved forward without resistance before. The pause had not saved him from danger, it had saved him from momentum. Momentum, once unchecked, rarely questions itself. Some believe this marks the most significant transformation of the story. The butterfly's interruption had not been about preventing harm alone. It had been about introducing resistance, where momentum threatens awareness. Resistance, in this sense, is not obstruction, it is calibration. The grandfather, in memory, had calibrated constantly. He adjusted plans mid-sentence. He reconsidered assumptions without embarrassment. He had valued accuracy over pride. The boy recognized these traits resurfacing in himself, not as imitation, as alignment. There are tellings where the boy wondered briefly whether this alignment meant something had returned or whether it had simply never left. The question did not linger. The story does not require answer. It allows that influence can persist without presence, and that presence can dissolve without disappearing entirely. As the pause integrated further, it began to feel less like interruption and more like companionship, not a voice, not guidance, a space, a small interval where choice remained flexible. The boy came to respect this space. He did not fill it immediately. He allowed it to exist, even when it felt uncomfortable. Discomfort often indicates relevance. Some believe this tolerance for discomfort distinguished the pause from hesitation born of fear. Fear avoids discomfort. This pause invited it briefly, then released it. There are versions where the boy recognized how rare this tolerance was. Most people fill silence quickly. They move past hesitation instinctively. They equate speed with confidence. The pause resisted this equation. It suggested that confidence could coexist with waiting. The butterfly, now distant in memory, no longer symbolized return or protection. It symbolized introduction. Introductions are not meant to repeat. They initiate. The boy no longer expected signs. He no longer framed events through the lens of reincarnation explicitly. The possibility remained, but it no longer demanded attention. What demanded attention was timing. Timing in words, timing in decisions, timing in restraint. Some believe this is where the story sheds its strangeness and becomes ordinary, and perhaps that is intentional. If meaning remained attached to spectacle, it would limit usefulness. By dissolving into behavior, the story extends beyond itself. The grandfather's influence, whether through memory, example, or something unnamed, had completed its transition. It no longer needed form. It existed as practice. There are tellings where the boy eventually realized that this practice did not make life easier. It made it clearer. Clarity is not comfort. It is responsibility. The pause did not eliminate mistakes. It clarified them. It did not prevent regret. It contextualized it. This clarity shaped resilience. The boy learned to accept outcomes without collapsing into self-blame or denial. When things went wrong, he adjusted. When things went right, he did not rush to credit. The pause taught him how to stand between cause and effect without panic, and perhaps that is the story's quiet progression, from interruption to habit to skill. The butterfly was never meant to be the ending, it was the opening. According to every version that persists, what followed mattered more than what appeared, and what followed was not miraculous. It was practiced. There are versions that suggest the pause eventually stopped feeling like something new and started feeling like something owned. According to several reconstructions, this shift was subtle. It did not announce itself with clarity or relief. One day, the boy simply realized that he no longer wondered where the pause came from. He only noticed when it was useful. Ownership changes responsibility. When something feels borrowed, it must be protected. When it feels owned, it must be maintained. The pause, now internalized, required attention rather than reverence. The boy learned this during moments when he ignored it. Not deliberately, casually. A quick response spoken too soon, a decision made to avoid discomfort, an assumption accepted without verification. In these moments, the absence of the pause was not dramatic, but its effect was noticeable. Consequences arrived faster, not catastrophic, clarifying. Regret sharpened. Confusion lingered longer. Recovery required more effort. These outcomes did not punish him. They informed him. Some believe this feedback loop completed the lesson that had begun with the butterfly. Protection had given way to accountability. The pause was no longer a gift. It was a responsibility. The grandfather, in memory, had lived this way. He had never blamed circumstance when timing failed. He adjusted habits. He accepted correction without defensiveness. The boy recognized this pattern more clearly now, not as nostalgia, but as standard. There are tellings where the boy began to notice how others reacted to his pauses. Some misinterpreted them as hesitation, others mistook them for uncertainty. He did not correct these assumptions. Explanation would have distorted the function. The pause worked best when unannounced. There are versions where the boy encountered pressure to abandon the pause. Moments when speed was praised. When decisiveness was equated with strength, when slowing down was framed as weakness. In these moments the pause felt inconvenient, but the boy noticed something important. When he ignored the pause to meet expectation, the result rarely improved. When he honored it, outcomes stabilized, even if approval did not. This trade-off mattered. It clarified priority. The pause was not about being admired. It was about being accurate. Accuracy, the boy learned, rarely feels impressive in the moment. It reveals its value later, when consequences unfold quietly instead of dramatically. The butterfly, now distant, did not reappear even symbolically. This absence reinforced something essential. If the story required repetition to hold meaning, it would be fragile. Instead, its meaning endured precisely because it no longer depended on reinforcement. Some believe this endurance is the truest sign that the interruption had completed its purpose. Introductions end, practices continue. There are tellings where the boy realized that the pause had changed how he experienced time itself. Moments stretched slightly, not slower, but wider. He felt less chased by urgency, less compressed by expectation. Time became something he moved through rather than something that pushed him forward. This shift did not eliminate pressure. It redistributed it. Pressure moved from speed to precision, from reaction to choice. The boy began to notice how often people confuse urgency with importance. The pause helped separate the two. Important things remained important even when delayed briefly. Urgent things often dissolved under scrutiny. This discernment altered how he allocated energy. Not everything deserved immediate response. Not every moment required resolution. The grandfather, in memory, had understood this deeply. He had known when to act and when to wait, not because he lacked decisiveness, but because he respected consequence. The boy now carried that respect forward. There are versions where the boy encountered a situation that might once have felt dangerous, not physically but emotionally, a confrontation, a choice with social consequence. The pause arrived. He used it, not to avoid the moment, but to enter it differently. He spoke with clarity rather than speed. He listened longer than expected. The outcome did not become easy, but it became honest. Honesty changed everything. Some believe this moment marked the pause's full integration. It no longer protected the boy from life. It helped him participate in it more deliberately. This distinction matters. Protection isolates, participation connects. The butterfly's intervention had isolated a single moment. What followed connected many. There are skeptics who would argue that none of this requires reincarnation, memory, or return. The story does not object. It allows that meaning can be constructed without certainty. That influence does not need explanation to be effective. What matters is continuity. The pause endured. It adapted. It matured, and it no longer required reference to its origin. The grandfather's presence, whether spiritual, psychological, or purely remembered, no longer needed to be named. Naming would have limited it. Unnamed, it remained flexible. There are tellings where the boy finally accepted that he might never know what the butterfly was. An insect, a coincidence, a vessel. The question lost urgency. Its function had been fulfilled. The pause had become part of him, not as belief, but as behavior. And behavior, once internalized, does not require narrative to persist. According to every version that survives, this phase ends without revelation. No truth is uncovered, no mystery resolved. Instead, there is steadiness. The boy moves through moments with calibrated timing. He adjusts when needed. He pauses when it matters. He accepts consequence when it arrives. And somewhere in this steadiness, the story completes another quiet turn. The interruption that once felt extraordinary now feels ordinary. And that ordinariness is not loss. It is success. Because whatever returned, if anything ever did not come to be observed forever. It came to be carried forward, in timing, in restraint, in the space where attention still has time to change what comes next. There are versions that suggest the pause eventually became something the boy relied on without realizing it, not consciously, not ceremonially. It appeared when it was needed and disappeared when it was not, woven so tightly into his behavior that separating it from instinct became impossible. According to several reconstructions, this was the phase where the boy stopped asking why the pause existed and began asking how to respect it. The question of origin, grandfather, butterfly, coincidence, lost relevance. What mattered was maintenance. Attention requires upkeep. When neglected, it dulls. When practiced, it sharpens. The boy learned this during periods of distraction, stress, noise, expectation. All of these shortened the pause, not eliminated it, but compressed it until it was barely perceptible. In these moments, decisions felt rushed again, outcomes felt heavier. The difference was subtle but consistent. When the pause was honored, consequences felt manageable. When ignored, they felt avoidable in hindsight. Some believe this pattern completed the transition from mystery to responsibility. The pause was no longer something that happened to the boy. It was something he used. The grandfather, in memory, had used timing in this way. He had not trusted instinct blindly. He had refined it through attention. The boy now understood that instinct without attention is impulse, but instinct with attention becomes judgment. This distinction mattered deeply. Judgment does not guarantee correctness. It increases accountability. There are tellings where the boy encountered situations that demanded decisive action. Moments where hesitation carried cost. Where waiting too long would have produced its own consequence. In these moments, the pause did not prevent action. It clarified it. The boy learned to recognize when the pause had done its work, when enough information had surfaced, when delay would no longer improve outcome. This recognition felt different from impatience. It felt complete. Some believe this was the grandfather's true influence resurfacing, not the act of stopping, but the discernment of when to stop stopping. The butterfly in this framing had never been about stillness. It had been about timing. There are versions where the boy reflected on how many people confuse speed with certainty. They move quickly to avoid discomfort. They decide fast to avoid ambiguity. The pause resisted this impulse, not by enforcing slowness, but by insisting on readiness. Readiness cannot be rushed. The boy noticed that readiness felt calm, even under pressure. When he acted from readiness, outcomes felt aligned, even if they were difficult. When he acted from urgency, outcomes felt reactive, even if they were successful. This contrast guided him more reliably than any rule. There are tellings where the boy encountered moments of regret. Not large, specific. Words spoken too quickly. Choices made to satisfy expectation rather than judgment. These moments did not negate the pause. They refined it. Regret sharpened awareness. It reminded him that attention is renewable but not permanent. It must be reclaimed repeatedly. Some believe this ongoing reclamation is the story's quiet message. Protection does not persist without participation. The grandfather, if present in any form beyond memory, did not intervene here. He did not correct. He did not interrupt. The pause belonged to the boy now. There are versions where the boy realized that this ownership carried loneliness, not isolation, but autonomy. No one else could sense the pause for him. No one else could apply it in his place. Responsibility could not be delegated. This autonomy was not burden. It was adulthood. The butterfly's intervention, when viewed from this distance, felt less like rescue and more like initiation, a demonstration meant to be outgrown. Initiations do not repeat. They open a door, then withdraw. The boy no longer needed symbols. He did not interpret everyday interruptions as signs. He trusted awareness without dramatizing it. This restraint preserved clarity. There are tellings where the boy eventually recognized that the pause had shaped his identity subtly but deeply. He was known as someone deliberate, someone who did not rush conclusions, someone whose decisions carried fewer surprises, not because they were perfect, but because they were considered. This reputation did not inflate him. It grounded him. Deliberation invites responsibility. People expect consistency from those who pause thoughtfully. The boy learned to meet that expectation, not through certainty, but through presence. The grandfather in life had been present this way, not dominating, not passive, attentive. The boy recognized now that attention is not inherited automatically. It is demonstrated once, then practiced repeatedly. The butterfly had demonstrated. What followed was practice. There are skeptics who would argue that this story describes nothing more than personal growth shaped by memory. The story does not resist this. It allows that growth can be sparked by coincidence, loss, example, or all three combined. What remains constant is the sequence: interruption, introduction, integration. The pause moved from external to internal, from event to behavior. As this phase unfolds, there is no conclusion yet. The boy continues to move through situations that demand timing. Some he handles well, others teach him through consequence. The pause does not prevent life, it prepares him for it. And perhaps that is the quiet culmination the story approaches. Not proof of return, not confirmation of reincarnation, but evidence of continuity. That something learned or remembered at exactly the right moment can continue shaping choices long after the original interruption has faded. The butterfly does not return. It does not need to. Its work was never about staying, it was about beginning something that could continue without it. There are versions that suggest the pause finally revealed its full meaning only when the boy stopped thinking of himself as someone who had been protected. According to several reconstructions, this realization did not arrive suddenly. It surfaced gradually through repetition, through ordinary moments where nothing remarkable happened, and that in itself felt significant. Life continued. There were no signs, no confirmations, no reminders disguised as wings or coincidence. And yet the pause remained. It appeared when the boy faced moments that carried weight beyond immediate consequence. Decisions that would shape direction rather than outcome. Choices that could not be undone easily, even if they did not feel dangerous at the time. In these moments, the pause felt different. Not urgent, not sharp. It felt steady. Some believe this steadiness marked the final transformation of the interruption that began with the butterfly. What had once been an external distraction had become an internal orientation, a way of standing inside moments rather than rushing through them. The boy no longer associated the pause with fear or safety. He associated it with responsibility. Responsibility, he learned, does not announce itself loudly. It arrives quietly, asking to be noticed before action, not after consequence. There are tellings where the boy reflected on how differently he now experienced uncertainty. Uncertainty no longer demanded immediate resolution. It could be held, examined, allowed to exist without pressure. The pause created space for this holding. This space mattered. Without it, uncertainty turns into anxiety. With it, uncertainty becomes information. The grandfather, in memory, had always treated uncertainty this way. He had never rushed to explain what he did not understand. He waited, he observed, he adjusted when clarity emerged. The boy recognized this pattern clearly now, not as imitation, as inheritance. The butterfly's role from this distance appeared almost minimal. A single moment, a brief interruption. And yet without it, the pattern might never have surfaced. The demonstration had been enough to initiate awareness. Everything else had been practice. There are versions where the boy considered whether he would ever tell this story in full. Not the event, the effect. The answer remained unclear. Stories like this resist closure. They invite interpretation where certainty cannot exist. The boy understood that sharing it too openly might distort its function, turning practice into belief, attention into symbol. He chose restraint. Restraint preserved integrity. Some believe this choice reflected the grandfather's nature more than any explanation ever could. He had never overshared meaning. He had trusted experience to teach what words could not. The pause continued to operate without commentary. It did not demand recognition. It did not seek confirmation. It existed. There are tellings where the boy eventually encountered moments of irreversible consequence, choices that no pause could undo. In these moments, the pause did not prevent action. It accompanied it. The boy moved forward with awareness rather than certainty. He accepted that not all outcomes could be softened, that some paths carried weight regardless of timing. This acceptance mattered. It prevented bitterness. The pause had never promised safety. It had offered clarity. Clarity does not eliminate pain. It contextualizes it. Some believe this was the story's final lesson. Protection is temporary. Awareness is transferable. The grandfather's return, if it could be called that, had not been about remaining close forever. It had been about passing something forward that could survive absence. The butterfly had not stayed. The pause had. There are skeptics who would argue that this story describes nothing beyond personal discipline shaped by loss. The story does not deny this. It allows that meaning can exist without metaphysics. That influence can travel through memory alone. What remains consistent across all versions is that something changed at exactly the right moment, and that change endured. The boy did not become someone who searched for explanations. He became someone who respected timing. This respect shaped how he spoke, how he decided, how he accepted consequence. The pause became his, not borrowed, not gifted, maintained. According to every reconstruction that persists, the story does not conclude with revelation. It concludes with continuation. The boy moves forward into moments that demand attention. Sometimes he pauses, sometimes he misjudges, always he learns. The butterfly exists only at the beginning, not as proof, not as promise, as interruption, and perhaps that is enough, because interruption, when it arrives at the exact moment it is needed, does not have to explain itself. It only has to begin something that can continue without it. The grandfather does not return again. He does not need to. What mattered was never the form. It was the timing, and timing once learned becomes part of how someone lives, quietly, deliberately, and without needing to look back at the moment when attention first changed everything. There are versions that suggest the story never needed a conclusion. It needed continuity. According to the quietest interpretations, nothing more ever happened. No second interruption, no confirmation, no moment that transformed ambiguity into certainty. Life moved forward the way life usually does, through ordinary days, shaped by choices that rarely feel significant while they are being made. The boy did not grow up believing he was protected by something unseen. He did not interpret every pause as guidance. He did not search for meaning in coincidence. He simply learned to respect timing. That respect shaped him more than belief ever could. It allowed him to stand inside moments without rushing through them, to choose with awareness rather than impulse, to accept consequence without resentment. The grandfather remained absent in every way that mattered. No signs, no messages, no return. And yet, something of him persisted. Not as memory replayed, but as behavior continued. The kind of influence that does not announce itself, does not demand recognition, and does not require explanation to remain effective. The butterfly existed only once. Brief, unremarkable to anyone else, complete. It did not stay to be admired. It did not repeat to be believed. It appeared, interrupted a sequence, and disappeared the moment it was no longer needed. What followed was not magic. It was practice, a pause before action, a breath before decision, a space where choice remained possible. Whether that pause was inherited, remembered, or simply learned at the right moment is never resolved. The story does not need to decide. Its meaning survives without certainty. Because the outcome was never about proof. It was about what endured after attention changed. And perhaps that is the quiet truth these stories carry, not that someone returns as something else, but that what mattered most about them finds a way to continue, reshaped, internalized, and carried forward by someone willing to notice when timing matters.